Welcome to Compass Stories. I'm your host, Veronica Sterling. And my work is centered on helping people who are in the middle of disruption rediscover meaning, strengthen connection, and move forward with courage. I do this through speaking, sharing experiences, and storytelling. I'm grateful that you've joined me for a conversation today. And if it resonates with you, I hope that you will share it with someone else in your life. Thanks for being here. Have you ever considered turning your passion into a purpose? My guest today is Matthew Gellin. He is the Executive Artistic Director and CEO of American Legacy Theater. By using theater as a medium, his work is focused on strengthening communities and fostering empathy, understanding, and connection that lead to dialogue, action, and social change. Matthew's personal story winds through experiencing frustration that nearly caused him to leave the industry, to creation of a new concept that is reshaping lives in our community in ways many never thought was possible. Matthew's passion teaches us about personal storytelling, types of empathy, and to believe in the idea of plenty when we consider giving to others. I know you'll enjoy this conversation. I sure did. Let's get into it. Matthew, thank you for joining me. I'm so excited to be able to
I'm
have
really
this.
excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I'm excited to have you here because I know some of your background, but why don't you go ahead and tell the listener what you would like them to know about Matthew Gellin?
Say some of the high level things to know about me is I'm the youngest of five kids. Grew up in Buffalo, New York, to two professors in the college academic systems. And I've worked all over the world on three major continents in both business and in theater for the government, in the for-profit sector, and in the nonprofit sector, certainly for the last 20 years or so, as a theater artist. And say, my greatest passions in life outside of the arts are my family, my friends. I love my three children, and I love the Buffalo Bills.
Okay. So, one of the things that I remember about your career journey is so you've arrived in a role today where you are the CEO of the American Legacy Theater, but there was uh, I think a point in this journey where you weren't you were disappointed with theater. You weren't really sure
Yeah.
that um it was offering what you felt like it needed to offer. And so, how did you tell us that story for going from that disappointment to leading a theater today?
Yeah, it's a great story. Thank you for the opportunity to share. So basically, I was in my third year of undergraduate at SUNY Buffalo, and I was in the office of one of my mentors, Dr. Kaz Braun, who is a brilliant man and theater artist. And I was unhappy, which was unusual. And he said, "Why do you seem so unhappy?" And I said, "Well, it's very simply, I feel like I'm wasting my life." And he goes, "Oh my goodness, why do you feel like you're wasting your life?" And I said, "Well, because I hate theater." And I was a theater major, in addition to business. And so he was very confused. And he said, "When you say you hate theater, do you hate homework? Do you hate reading? Like, is that really, is it the work part that you don't like?" And I said, "No, no, no, no. Actually, it's all the theory, all the homework, all the practice that I love." I would just say transparently what I was reading about what theater used to be and could be is not what I was experiencing theater to actually be as an audience member, as an artist, as a director. And so he was like, well, tell me about that." And I started talking, and he said, "Well, hold on, hold on. English is like my fourth language." It's like, "Can you write it down?" Which, of course, to anyone who's ever worked with students, but particularly college age students, when you say write it down, what it means is we're probably never going to have this conversation again. Well, 3 days later, on that following Monday, I handed him 20 pages, single spaced, and he goes, "Well, what's this?"
Wow.
I said, "You told me to write it down." So I did. And he's like, "All right, well, give me about a month with this." So I said, "Okay." Month later, I'm in his office again. He goes, "How do you feel now?" I go, I'm more upset now than ever. I go, "Kaz, I'm like, this is costing me money and I'm unhappy." And I'm like, "Did you read the paper?" He goes, "Yes." He goes, "Now I want to give you context." He goes, "I've worked on 6 of the 7 continents. I've been published on all of those." Um, and he's like, "And there's some really interesting things in here." And I said, "Well, what did you uncover?" And he said, "About half the things in here, you're right. They're not done in the United States when it comes to theater. They're done in other parts of the world. It's very effective. I don't know why it's not done more." And I said, "Okay, great." I said, "What about the other half?" And he said, "Well, that's very simple." He goes, "I've never seen it before." I'm like, "Kez, you've seen everything." He goes, "No, I've never seen this." He goes, "And what's wild is some of the things you're talking about are things that I never thought of before."
Wow.
And I'm like, "Well, what am I supposed to do with that?" And he slid the paper across the table to me. He said, "Maybe that's what you're supposed to do with that." And that was a big challenge and a scary kind of precipice, if you will, that I then pushed off. And I said, "Well, maybe when I'm in my late 20s." And fast forward to I'm visiting him. I'm 27 years old at that time. And he says, "How's that whole thing going with the theater that you wrote down?" I said, "I'd handle it in my late 20s. He goes, "How old are you now?" I go, 27. He goes, "Seems pretty late." And so I was like, "All right, all right." And so I would say, really, at that point, going forward in my life, it kept coming back at me. And I knew that what I wanted to see changed in the landscape of our industry, but really how that melds into the landscape of our community and our society, I realized somebody has to do it. Um, and so at that point, I kind of stared into the belly of the beast, so to speak, and said, "Well, maybe I need to go do this." And I did not start American Legacy Theater then, but I definitely started putting some of those principles, those ideas into practice and started to test those. So that way, when, eventually 2016 comes around and I was now in Cincinnati and I realized I was going to be here for an extended period of time because I was now married, I was like, "All right, maybe now is the time to start putting those things all together under a singular name, under a singular ideology." And so now here we are 10 years later, 5 years as a volunteer after starting ALT, 5 years almost of being a full-time staff leader for the organization. And that's after, a decade plus of testing a lot of the ideologies and practices of ALT all over the world.
What is it that what was missing, and what are some of the things you started testing?
So, one of the things that made me fall in love with theater from the very beginning was there's these things called the Peloponnesian Wars in our human history, some of the bloodiest wars in the history of mankind, and they went on for generations and generations in the Mediterranean area. And what's incredible is that if you look at the documented history of the time and you look at the documented theater history of the time, what would happen is the wars would occur. And then every single year in Greece, there was this beautiful theater festival to the god Dionysus. And wars would literally be put on pause while the theater festival would take place. And people from both sides of the armies, right, would come in and share this space together. And it was also a space where kings and beggars were sharing space together. And sometimes they would go back to war when the festival was over. But many, many times, there's documentation, within a week or two of a festival ending, peace treaties would be signed that would last 30 to 60 years, a generation or two. and then the wars would pick back up. Somebody else did something else. But the fact that it was this theater experience that could actually, one, bring people of two completely different perspectives, warring perspectives, together peacefully was incredible. The fact that peace could then be created because of it, talk about social change. That to me was like, how do we achieve that? There was a greater purpose, there was a greater intent to the world of theater than exists, at least in our country for the most part. Theater exists primarily, and certainly for the last 150 to almost 200 years, to entertain, sometimes make people forget about things. And yet, what I was seeking was that social change, that acknowledgement that theater is not designed just to entertain. In fact, it's through the entertainment that breaks down our walls and our barriers that we create so that we can be more empathetic, so that we can create more connection to one another, to then raise an awareness around a matter, but more importantly, make that awareness move into an action. What is the
Mhm.
behavioral change and shift that we as individuals and we as a society take because of a theatrical experience? Whether it's a show or not, doesn't matter. The point is that it's theater exercising that. And so some of those things are things that, again, were non-existent in my life and arguably are non-existent outside of American legacy theater and maybe in a couple other places in small pockets. But this is certainly not standard. This is not mainstream. And it would be great for it to be as such. And I would say those are some of the things that we're testing. But then also, right? So now you're addressing like the why does theater exist? But then it's also about testing how theater exists. Because here's the thing: a lot of times when if you look up American Legacy Theater, we spell our name R-E at the end, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, that's interesting. You're American Legacy Theater, and you spell it the British way." I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. I spell it the art form way. The art form of theater is R-E. The physical space is an ER,
Oh, okay.
right?" And so what happens is we have, for the last 200 years in our country, completely made synonymous the art form and a physical building that is truly putting the art in a box of what it can be and what it ought to be. And so, in many ways, one of the things we're continually testing is this idea of can the spirit, can the idea, can the art of theater exist outside of a physical theater? Can it exist amongst people who would consider themselves non-creative? Can it exist amongst the illiterate? Can it exist amongst people who aren't, properly trained? And the answer is yes to all of them, by the way, because we're doing this, we do programming where we have children who are 3 years old, completely illiterate, writing, designing, and acting in their own original plays. So again, in many ways, it's about restoring theater back to people, which is where it started. And that's what makes it so powerful. And that it's not something designed for the top 10% of a society.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like my head is exploding with questions and comments. That's and thank you for like I can't take notes fast enough. But okay, because you just mentioned the 3 year olds, and I think that one of the ways that you are uh, acting on like making that social change impact is through the school program that you have with American Legacy Theater. And I do love that the idea of it isn't just to have kids learn how to make a play or, understand what stage left is, but really you're at their level, which could be 3 years old, could be high school level. They are wrestling with ideas, considering like what is their voice, like what is their authentic self. I I get this impression that you are in this program teaching these children things that even as grown adults we still struggle with sometimes and need to learn. So tell me more about tell so I'll ask you to teach me
You're
in a
not
minute.
wrong.
But yeah, but tell me a little bit more about the school program because I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge a truth, which is of all the children or all the people we work with, regardless of age, the percentage of them that end up going on into theater as a career pathway is very small, right? Let's say it was massive. Let's say it was 50%. It's not. But let's say it was 50% of the people we worked with went on to do theater as a profession. That means the other 50% are not, which means it can't be just about creating plays or creating theater. There is inherent value into creating plays and creating theater. Let me acknowledge that first and foremost. I'm not an anti-theater. I'm an anti 20th century theater person, maybe. But no, but it's one of those things where it's about whole child development. And you hear about this in the social human service sector. Because again, it's acknowledging that you can't approach learning and development as a person, let alone a child, through a singular trajectory. It is not linear, right? It's probably not even circular. It's this idea of almost like if you could imagine, like if there was 100 suns around your body, and each sun was shooting rays of warmth into you. It's acknowledging that the children and people need that growing, need that development from every possible angle. And so the question is, how might we enhance that experience of learning, in this case for children and individuals as a whole? And the biggest part of the way to do it is to do it through play, right? Rather than teaching to a test, we sculpt and shape behavior that can then be practically applied. It's beyond critical thinking. Critical thinking is, oh, okay, I understand this concept and therefore I can replicate it again. This is not about thinking. This is about feeling. This is about emotional connection, one person to another, and or one person to an idea. And that behavior then allows us to replicate and do the thinking without even knowing. And so again, it's critical thinking on steroids, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so for us, it's one of those things where, again, on the surface, yes, we help 3, 4-year-olds write, design, act in their own original productions around community issues that are important to them. We give them a budget that they manage and maintain, and then they perform it for the public. It's incredible. There are people who've been in the theater industry for 40 years, have never created an original play. So they're already doing something that so many professionals have never done. That should be lauded and applauded. Okay. And yet, even as the artistic director, I say, so what? Where are our children genuinely improving, not just as artists, but as people? And there are a number of indicators you can look at, right? One of the things we evaluate is we in that space towards finding the better person. We look to cultivate safe space. We believe that empathy growth, which happens after safe space is established, empathy growth really is the the needle in the haystack, the diamond in the rough sort of measurement that makes all of this possible. And we've got data to prove it. But the most important thing at the end of the day is as we explore empathy and as we start to teach behaviors rather than concepts, that is when all these things seem to unlock. And so our youngest learners, the systems that these children are in America, we utilize kindergarten readiness as a major metric, right? Because our social service friends, our human service friends have done all this longitudinal data that says, hey, if a kid's not ready for kindergarten on their first day of kindergarten with this test and evaluation, they're more likely to drop out of school, more likely to end up in jail, more likely to end up in, I mean, it's horrifying. And yet, kindergarten readiness scores are terrible across the country. And so it's one of those things where it's like, well, can we drive success there? Where we know through theater we are transforming a society. And again, in our space and in the schools we're working in, the answer is yes, overwhelmingly so. To a point where, again, to just give some context, right? Children who don't go through our programming, in Cincinnati, they say the children see about a 60% measurable movement towards kindergarten readiness in 1 year's time. That makes sense. 52 weeks. Okay, cool. It is what it is. The children that go through American Legacy Theater's program see up to a 92% measurable movement in as
Wow.
short as 5 to 10 weeks.
Wow.
This is an astronomical game changer for each individual child, their family, the school system, and the society at large that they're going to end up working in. If nothing else changes in their life, we know from the data that the rest of the system has, because they're more ready for kindergarten, boom, their life is set into a completely different path. Now, could more intervention lead to even greater impact? Absolutely. But we know that we are hitting that critical point in a way that the system cannot without us right now. And to me, that is when American Legacy Theater is firing on all cylinders. That is the point of theater. Theater that is reshaping lives literally, and also the common thoughts we get time and time again from the parents, the guardians, the administrators, the teachers, the children themselves is I never thought person X, Tommy, Sarah, Josiah, never thought that it was possible that this kid or that I could do this.
Yeah.
And they're establishing a whole new bar of what is possible for themselves and for their community.
So, one of the things that I try to tell people in my message is that, once we start taking action, towards our purpose, towards our most meaningful life, however, we define that, that our capacity starts expanding. But when we start, we really have no idea how great that potential can become. Whatever
Correct.
you imagine the outcome of the effort could be, I tell people just times it by 10 because we really have no idea. So when you're talking now about this monumental impact on children in the community where you live, when you think back to that 27-year-old being challenged to change theater, like what
Yeah.
surprises you the most? Did you have, I imagine you had no idea that you could have this kind of impact, or did you see some version of it?
That's a great question. I would say that no, I would not, I don't think I would have identified this as the impact we were making. Um, I would say that in many ways, the embers, so to speak,
Yeah.
were there because the idea from the very beginning was that theater storytelling is inherently baked into all of us,
Mm-hmm.
right? This ability to connect, to know, to understand one another on an emotional, dare I say, spiritual or quantum level beyond intellectual understanding is something that I've also always believed, right? I mean, if we talk about that paper, I mean, I talk about time space continuums and things like that. Like, it's lots of fun stuff that we didn't even get a chance to get into. But the point is, one of the things that I always said was theater, if it was designed at the very beginning to be accessible for everyone to participate, and if we look at theater at its very foundation, it exists between an audience and an artist. Why have we, for the last 5,000 years, forced the accessibility to be only at the audience level? Why can't the accessibility for everyone be at the artistic level?
Interesting.
And there's lots of people saying, no, 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 this is why, that's why. Da, 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 da. And yet, there was a part of me from day one that always said everybody should be able to be on the artistic side as well, to create, to co-create. And so I think that the ideology, that openness
Mm-hmm.
to say, of course, a 3-year-old would be able to develop works of art. But did I, as 27 years old, be like, oh, yeah, like this is how they'll do it. This is the pathway, the program. And oh, by the way, I see it tying to kindergarten readiness. No, when I was 27, I didn't even know kindergarten readiness was a thing.
Yeah.
So, and so in many ways, it's those pathways of life that unfold, that happen. I mean, as I talked about, ALT and being a volunteer for 5 years. Well, while I was a volunteer for 5 years with ALT, I still had to find a way to live and exist. And so I raised money for nonprofits. I worked for a great organization that many people may have heard of called United Way. And it was there that I found how critical kindergarten readiness is. It's also where I found out how dramatically horrible, not just Cincinnati, but the whole country is at kindergarten readiness. And some people are like, oh no, we're doing good. We got 60%. That's not good because
Yeah.
I have 3 children, all one who's still in preschool, but the other 2 went through preschool. I don't want to have my kids be in the 40% of children that are not ready for kindergarten.
Yeah.
This is not a good number until we hit 100%. Let's be real, right? And so it's one of those things where that life experience, that listening and being in the moment, so we're ready to respond, which is a foundation of acting. Listen, respond, be in the moment, right? And so you're hearing that component of, hold on a second, this is really important. This kindergarten readiness thing, before I even had children, I'm finding out this is pretty important. And then you just keep wondering, how can it not be better than it is with all of these brilliant, and there's so many brilliant, there's so many awesome people who are working in early childhood education. This is not to knock them. This is to say, wow, you got the system from 0 to 60.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. But
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason, you can't break through that glass ceiling. We need an innovation. And that innovation many times comes from thinking outside of a box, outside of a physical wall. Remember when we talked about that with theater, right? That physical wall? How do you exist outside of that space? And so that's where this concept comes from, is acknowledging, like, hold on, there might be another lens of expertise that's missing. Because at the end of the day, I mean, we've had people say, oh, should we just like give all early childhood education funding to American Legacy Theater and system be damned? No, because because we're able to do it because of all those foundational components,
Yeah.
because of these things that are there. Again, we might be able to get children from 60 to, let's say we could get them all the way to 100. We don't know. Maybe we can. But that first 60, we can't do by ourselves. We're not early childhood experts. So we still
Yeah.
need the successes we've built upon. It doesn't diminish the success that's been established, but it acknowledges the critical gap that we've been missing,
Mm-hmm.
and clearly what the next wave of funding ought to be. Absolutely put it into ALT.
It's like the success story, it will be built out of the whole collective effort, the
Has to be.
whole community. Yes. So I do in a minute want to come back to storytelling and time continuum. But before we do that, I want to circle back to empathy just for a moment, because you talk about the prerequisite for empathy being, feeling that you're in a safe space.
Mhm.
So I've had a lot of conversations with people and empathy comes up. Really, I think in general, what is coming up in these conversations is this very real need for genuine human connection. And in the absence of that, there is the space for grief and despair and shame to grow inside of all of that isolation. So we need to be able to connect with others for our own just health and wellness. But when we've had conversations about empathy, what it is interesting to me that you talk about the need for safety, because what I have learned is that showing empathy to someone is actually uh, it's very uncomfortable because it
Mm-hmm.
sort of requires us to sit with our own discomfort, and maybe the lens that we would normally look through is makes it difficult to see that story, or maybe we have our own shame, fear, isolation that
Exactly.
is stirred up when we are, connecting and showing empathy to another person. And so when you talk about the need for safety, I'm like, "Oh, of course, because if we don't have safety, we can't add even greater discomfort to it." But can you teach me a little bit more about that? Like, what does it mean for us? How do we define having a safe space or believing that we are safe so that we can then take on the discomfort of offering empathy?
So I would say, well, I'll address the safe space, I promise. But I would say it's an interesting frame you put in there about offering empathy. And I don't know if it's necessarily about empathy is not something one gives to offer. There's nothing to offer. It's about openness. It's about, can we open ourselves up to receive empathy? Because in many ways, it's not necessarily about empathy existing person to person. Again, this is where we're getting a little metaphysical. It's this idea that empathy exists in the universe. It's akin to a chi or a chakra or what you've heard so many of these terms over millennia. It's this idea of, can you be so open that the universe can actually use you as an instrument of empathy? Right? You could open, you
Yes.
channel it in so that it flows through you. That it's that sort of openness. It's a vulnerability. And many people feel vulnerable or allow themselves to feel vulnerable when they feel safe. And so how do we create that safety? It's physical safety, it's psychological safety, it's all this, it's all that, right? Because when you think about that, well, I'm going to ask you, Veronica. I know you're interviewing me, but I'm going to turn the tables for just a moment, right? But like, when you think about the people that you have been most empathetic with, or people that you have felt most emotional connection to, what is it about those people that allow you to open up to them in that such a way?
Hmm. I think I have been more willing to reach out to people who are struggling, or push myself to get into the space to act for them if they're people in my life, because I already know this person's important to me. And part of why they're important to
Hmm.
me is because they have been there for me. And that I call it, and not even maybe in a big way. I say it's like we all have a trust fund, and you're just constantly making deposits into the trust fund. And sometimes in relationships, you might make a withdrawal from the trust fund. That happens
That's
too.
right.
But the people that I'm going to lean into are people that it's like, even if we have a disagreement about something, the trust fund is would not be depleted from that.
Ding, 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 right? It's
Yeah.
this idea. And sometimes people are saying sometimes it's their partner, sometimes it's their best friend, sometimes it's a parent or a mentor, or it could be a total stranger.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, as you mentioned, it comes back to this space of either trust dare I say, anonymity when it's a stranger.
Mm-hmm.
And
Interesting.
that judgment is not coming. There is no fear of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
I can express this without you judging me. And if you do, like, who cares? We just met, at this coffee shop. I'll never see you again for the rest of my life. So there's a safety there. There's also a safety in a person you maybe committed your life to. There is a safety to somebody you've known since you were 6 years old who has seen you through every possible thing. They did their judgment when you were a teenager,
Yeah.
right? We did judgment then, and we've grown. But it's that space. So it is that component where we don't have to be performative, where we don't feel like we need to prove anything to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Not because we're such experts, but because we're so vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And it is that vulnerability that we can create when that safety has existed, which to your point is based on trust. And that trust sometimes is established over years,
Mm-hmm.
decades.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like in many ways, that's what's challenging about working with adults sometimes is that we also, the longer that we live, the more we buy into the misconception that trust can only exist after decades
Mm-hmm.
of existing together. Children, that's what makes them so amazing. Children, you walk in, if you've got a big smile, if somebody they also trust says, well, this is Mr. Matthew. He's a wonderful person. The kids go, okay,
Okay.
great.
Yes.
That's it. Because somebody else I trust told me that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, could that be used negatively? Do we still need to teach our children about like how to
Sure.
engage with strangers? Yeah, of course. Of course. But this idea that the children are inherently trusting. And if they're not, that gives us so many key indications of where the work needs to begin with that child or
Mm-hmm.
that classroom. And so that's another reason why when we work with youth, the younger they are, the more work we can get done in shorter hours together. Part of it is because where they're at developmentally, but part of it is because where they're at emotionally. They haven't been building up all those walls. Trust exists almost from moment one, whereas older students who are in elementary school, and I'm talking older students like third grade,
Sure.
not even older, and third grade and up, right? Children have already put up all these walls that you need 6, 7 sessions with them before they begin to trust you
Mm-hmm.
and now really dive into the work. And so and again, if that's happening to an 8 or a 9-year-old, now what's happening to the 19-year-old? What's happening to the 39-year-old? You probably have a lot more than 8 sessions you have to do just to build that level of trust.
Yeah.
And that is a reflection on lots of things. But
Mm.
but that's about knowing the process.
Yeah. I think that my professional work has given me, like, in the professional space, a skill set to have empathy and connect in a way that protects boundaries for me. So I've, if I'm in a hospice space, I'm talking to people who have experienced grief, and every grief story is different. Every loss is different for every person, the relationship, the dynamics that went into it. But then even outside of that, being, in a senior care space, it was easy for me to have empathy for the 80-year-old who's now very vulnerable and needs help, because I didn't know if he was a jerk when he was 50, right? Like that's
Right.
just not information that I have. And then simultaneously, I would have to learn to give empathy to the adult child that did know he was a jerk when he was 50. And so just, on the surface, I don't really understand this tension in this relationship that I see because he's so nice and sweet, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I think working through that professionally, helped me find ways to connect and put some boundary. But I do have to be careful in my personal life because I know that sometimes I won't just put up a boundary. I'll go for a full wall, full on fort
Yeah.
with a moat and just
It's beautiful though.
it's beautiful. It's well manicured and it's lovely, but it's like I'm much more cautious about making that connection. And I've really had to kind of learn that it, it, you have to be willing to do it even if you're not comfortable to do it, right? And that's hard. And of course, now here I am in this wild little season of my life where I'm just being totally vulnerable and just saying, okay, well, now I'll just put myself out there and build it into a story and share it with everyone, you know? Judgment be damned. So, yeah, that's been an interesting uh, path for me so far.
Well, and again, I do want to take a moment to also address like the component of empathy too, because a lot of times when people talk about empathy, at least to me, I'm interested to know, Veronica, if it's similar for you. But usually when people talk to me about their perception of empathy, they say, "Oh, it's like, you know, um, understanding things from someone's perspective. Like if I could, imagine myself walking a mile in their shoes." And that's right. That is absolutely a component of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
But even in my description, probably for your listeners, it's forcing them to go, they're thinking about it, which is right. That is cognitive based empathy. Can I intellectually reason and understand, right? Kind of like what we were talking about earlier with critical thinking. However, there's also somatic empathy.
Yes.
Can you genuinely feel what someone else is feeling? When someone's feeling pain and hurt, can you feel that? When someone's feeling joy, can you feel that with them? And that is some of that kind of glue that exists between. Remember, we talked about our work with theater, and we talked about behavioral
Mm-hmm.
creation. There's a third component of empathy, which is behavioral empathy, which is, might you feel and understand things to such a degree that your behavior changes,
Mm-hmm.
right? And again, it's one of those things, and this is not to knock anyone. I'm calling this out because this is something that even I, with the best of intentions, this and that. Oh, I'm so empathetic. Well, here's the thing. Here's the reality. When you see somebody, you're driving your car, you're at a red light, and there's somebody with a sign saying, "I'm hungry. I need food." A lot of times people say, "Oh my gosh." And if it's raining, "Oh my gosh, I I can't imagine." Well, okay, so you're having a hard time empathizing. There's sometimes people say, "Oh my gosh, it's so cold outside." And you start to get shivers and you start to feel this and you start to feel the hunger. That's emotional empathy, absolutely. But the $1 million question is, did you stop and give them food? Did you
Mm-hmm.
stop and give them an
Mm-hmm.
umbrella so they're not standing in the rain? Did you stop and give them some money so maybe they could buy food? That's behavioral. When
Mm-hmm.
you've been so moved that you make a behavioral change in yourself. And I'm the first person to raise my hand to say, nope, I don't do
Yeah.
that all the time.
Yeah.
I might not even do that most of the time. Well, because I got to get to work. I got to get to this meeting. I got my kids in the car. Whatever it is, we come up with these excuses to create those blocks.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't make us bad people, but it does inform where we are at in our development. And the question,
Mm-hmm.
and I talk about empathy a lot of times akin to like the martial arts, right? It's this idea that it is not something you have or you don't have. It's not something you channel and you don't channel. It's to what degree and to how of a masterful level can you do it, right? So, you know, there might be some people who are saying, "I'm just starting my empathy journey now. I'm a white belt in empathy." Awesome. Thank you. Welcome to the journey. It's a long one, okay? And there might be some people who are brown belts, and people might look at me and go, "Oh, Matthew, you must be like a fourth degree black belt in empathy." Let's just say, for the sake of conversation, I am. I'm a fourth degree black belt in empathy. But you know what that means? That means I'm not yet a fifth degree black belt in empathy. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
certainly not a sixth degree black belt in empathy.
Yes.
And so it's this idea of continuing to learn, continuing to develop, continuing to exercise, that again, it gets to the point where, again, you can always become more empathetic. And at this time, in my experience, I haven't gotten to a point yet where I've ever been like, "Ooh, that's too much empathy. That's too much empathy." I mean, and because again, part of empathy it goes both ways, right? To a
Yeah.
point where like it's not, because some people are like, "Oh, if I'm just so empathetic, then I'll just completely forget about myself." No, you won't,
Mm-hmm.
because you're with yourself 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is impossible to forget yourself. Even the most selfless people can't forget
Can't.
about themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be all right. Now, do we sometimes feel emotionally what someone else is feeling when we're not in a place where we can feel that, because we might re-traumatize ourselves, dare I
Mm-hmm.
say? That's
Sure.
possible, and that's a safety issue,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
right? So we have to take care of safety so
Mm-hmm.
that we can be empathetic. But sometimes, and I was just sharing this the other day with actually our team here at ALT, which is safety does not equate comfort. Those are not the same
No.
thing.
Okay. Yes.
In fact, in many ways, they might be diametrically opposed at times. One can be incredibly safe and incredibly uncomfortable. And that's where the growth probably is happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Empathy isn't intellectual. In fact, I would argue that the intellectual approach to empathy is not even about having an appropriate boundary. It's going back to that putting up a wall and disconnecting, because it is, oh, it looks really cold out there. If he just could get an umbrella, gives an
Yeah.
opportunity for us to walk away and disconnect. Uh, Emotional connection is, I think, a slippery slope. I think when you mention being able to acknowledge, I have this situation will create an emotional overload for me, and I need to put up a boundary for myself. I think that's very appropriate. That's protecting you and the other person. But when we become so emotionally engaged that we just flood the situation with our own emotional response, I think that's another wall, because now
Mhm.
I've just taken over and this is another disconnect. You can't connect with me and I'm not actually giving empathy to you. So yeah, I think you're right. Empathy. I think that's why people say empathy is a superpower, because it's really something that you have to act on if it is something that you have.
Correct. And I love the way you framed it, because it brings up one of like the foundational principles of acting. That again, to be everything always goes, because acting is, it's one of those things where science is now just catching up to the art that we've known to be true for millennia. And it's this idea that I love to put this out to people. It's one of my favorite slides in presentations. So I do this big sign, there's someone at the center, and I say, it's not about you.
Yeah.
It's not about you. To your point, it's not about, oh, I'm feeling and now let me overtake this.
Mm-hmm.
It's about validating. I can
Mm-hmm.
feel what you're feeling, and I can affirm these are valid feelings
Yeah.
that you're having right now.
Mm-hmm.
I can acknowledge how painful this must be for you right
Mm-hmm.
now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about, oh, let me tell you about the time I felt this too. No, no, no. I'm feeling it
No,
now.
no.
The time I'm feeling
Yes.
it is when you're feeling it right now. And so let's talk about you. And so again, one of the foundational components of acting. Listen, respond, and be in the moment. But you
Yeah.
must listen first, which means it's about the other person, or it's
Yes.
about the society or the world or the universe. Is that if we are not listening genuinely first, can't do it. It's the foundation of everything that's empathy.
Yes, that is very good. I do think this is maybe not totally related, but it has come into my head, when we're thinking about connecting with others and when we're offering empathy to someone, if it's someone in our life, I do think it's important that even if they are in a season of struggle, that it's still appropriate to share our joy with them. Because I feel like if we start saying, oh, one of the ways that I will help them because they are struggling is I will keep this great news to myself. I don't want to make them feel upset. I don't want them to, have to think about X, Y, and Z while they are going through whatever it is they're going through. I think that comes from a place of good intention, but it creates actually an opportunity for further isolation.
I agree with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because at the end of the day, if they're coming to you, right, it's probably because whether you trust them or not, they certainly trust you. That's how it's getting to you, right? And so if they trust you, right, what they're also sometimes, even if they're not looking for an answer, many times what people are looking for is community,
Mm-hmm.
balance,
Mm-hmm.
maybe hope. And to in this example that you're articulating, I would have gathered to say that this sense of, hey, here's something that's this is, oh, by the way, how are you doing, Veronica? I'm doing great.
Yeah.
We're doing this, we're doing that. It's pretty spectacular. And one, if somebody's genuinely connected with you, they might say, oh my gosh, there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
My gosh, I'm so glad that something is going right in the world,
Yes.
that you're having this success, right? So I think um to that point, it's not about, and again, it's this idea of like, right, when you talk about service to others, it's not at your detriment.
Mm-hmm.
It's service to others can be in benefit to you and in benefit to them as well. And so um I mean, I would say that at the core of empathy also is this idea of plenty, right? There is
Mm-hmm.
not, again, it's contained in the universe. It's not, there's not a limited quantity that, oh, we can only do empathy. There's only this much empathy and we got to hoard it all. No, and we have to save it. No,
Mm-hmm.
limitless. It
Yes.
exists. And it's a question of how much are we channeling? And again, we are channeling microscopic points of a percentage. It's there's so much more to be tapped into.
Yes. Okay, let's take a left turn here and go back to storytelling going beyond intellect, not developing through a singular trajectory in the time space continuum. I wrote all that down.
We might
I
have to
did.
do a whole nother podcast
I
episode
did.
on that.
Yes.
Well, we can scratch the surface. This will be a good tease.
Let's scratch the surface here. Okay. I'll tell you why it was really like standing out to me when you said those words. In the very beginning of this conversation, you talked about having awareness of something and turning that into action. So I am actually speaking to a group next week, and it the whole premise of this program is becoming aware of misalignment in our life and then taking action to change course and move forward with courage. So, one of the things that I believe to be true that I'd like to share with them is that uh, I don't think that we see our life as just this chronological timeline. We build stories into our life as it's happening, right? Like there's a college chapter, first job chapter, turning 40 chapter. And so I do believe that if we can create some idea of having a fresh start or, opening up a new chapter, it can shift the circumstances of the story that we're telling ourselves in a way that we really can take action and create a new story arc. You are the professional storyteller, writer, director. So tell me, am I on the right track here? Am I missing something in this explanation?
No, I would say that again, it's this idea of kind of going back to this imagery we talked about earlier about the difference between the theater art form and the theater, the physical building. And it's about truly breaking those walls, going outside of those realms of possibility. And I think again, we always talk about, oh, can you break through the glass ceiling? Can you do that? Like all these metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, those are restraints that we are putting upon ourselves. And so the question is, can we actually go outside of those restraints?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm not a singer. I could never sing. Oh, I could never write a book. Oh, I could never do this. I could never do that. But what if you could?
Mm-hmm.
What if you could do that?
Mm-hmm.
Then what happens? And in many ways, this is where like vision boards come into existence, right? Because
Sure.
this is part of what we talk about when we work with our children at the youngest ages is like, but if you can imagine it, it is in fact possible. Whether you do it or not is a whole nother thing, but you can't say it's impossible because you've just imagined it to be possible. And in order for it to be possible, this has to be true, this has to be true, and this has to be true.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So now just go make it true. Because a lot of times, if you can boil it down to what needs to be true in order for that to happen, you've literally articulated a pathway to make it happen. Many times.
Wow. Yes.
So that would be, I would say, the final thoughts I will leave you with today. And then, like I said, I'd be happy to do a round two if there's a need and desire and all that. But yeah,
yes,
it's been awesome.
I can see no future where this is the last conversation that you and I have. I'm definitely looking forward to more. And I want the listeners to know, I attended Bridge City, the production at American Legacy Theater, and I loved it. And I hope that everyone who is in the Cincinnati area will come to know this organization a little better. So I want to give you a moment to kind of give a plug. We've talked about it, at a high level, but I want to make sure you get a chance to really introduce the theater and the work you're doing, and then tell us how we can connect with you.
Yeah, so I would say thank you first and foremost for having me on. American Legacy Theater, we empower voices for equity. As you can hear through today's session, we don't use theater as just a medium of entertainment, but a medium and a continuum to ultimately achieve larger social-wide system change in our classrooms, but also through creating original plays and musicals with playwrights in conjunction and collaboration with community. And you don't have to be just in Cincinnati. We are called American Legacy Theater for a reason. People can access us all over the country and beyond. And I'd say probably the best place to see that is AmericanLegacyTheater.org. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and other major channels. So looking forward to connecting.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for opening up today, for spending some time with me. And I really learned a lot in this conversation. This was very valuable. I'm grateful for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica.
Okay. Thank you for listening to this episode of Compass Stories. I'm your host, Veronica Sterling. And if you've enjoyed this, please subscribe to hear more and share it with others. Thank you for doing so. That's really helpful for me. To learn more about my message and connect, you can find me at www.veronicasterling.com.